The balance of power in Washington hangs by just 2 votes, and a single state's primary election might just decide the future of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, the margins we are looking at right now are they're incredibly tight.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you're joining us because today we really need to unpack what is happening in the Capitol.
Right. And to understand the sheer gridlock that's just, paralyzing Washington right now, you only need to look at the numbers that hit our desks this morning.
And these are some massive numbers to kick things off. Let's start with President Trump.
Yeah, so Trump is currently sitting at a 47% average approval rating.
Which, just to be clear, is still net negative overall.
It is, yeah. But the thing is, it marks the highest peak of either of his 2 terms.
Right. And then the flip side of that polling is, well, it's pretty startling.
Extremely. The Democratic Party's approval rating has just completely collapsed to a historic all-time low. Only 27% of registered voters have a positive view of the party right now.
Wow. Only 27%.
Yeah, and just to put that in perspective for you, that is actually lower than the Republican Party's historic rock bottom right after the 2013 government shutdown.
That's a staggering drop. And I saw the numbers for independent voters, too. It looks like the floor has completely fallen out there.
Oh, absolutely. Only 11% of independents view Democrats positively right now.
Which brings us to the raw math of the Congress setup.
Right. Exactly. So in the Senate, the GOP secured a 53-47 majority. But over in the House of Representatives, their grip is historically fragile.
They hold a microscopic 218 to 213 advantage.
Yep, just 5 seats.
So that is our mission for today's deep dive. We are digging into how a 2-vote advantage dictates the entire upcoming legislative agenda.
And maybe more importantly, why the Democratic Party, which is currently out of power, is fracturing from the inside out instead of unifying against the majority.
Right. It's a fascinating dynamic. So let's start with the House math. You said 218 to 213, but that's not exactly set in stone, is it?
No, not at all. Those numbers are completely fluid right now. We're looking at 4 vacant seats.
Because Representatives Sylvester Turner and Raul Grijalva recently passed away, right?
Yes. And meanwhile, Republicans Matt Gaetz and Michael Waltz resigned their seats earlier for other roles.
Plus, we've got the upcoming April 1st special elections in Florida to fill those Republican vacancies.
Exactly. And don't forget New York Representative Elise Stefanik's pending resignation for her UN ambassador role. So the margins are literally bouncing around week by week.
So how does anything get done? To push an agenda through that kind of chaos, I know Republicans are relying on something called budget reconciliation. Can you explain that simply?
Sure. So budget reconciliation is essentially a procedural loophole. It lets the majority party bypass the standard 60-vote filibuster rule in the Senate.
Meaning they only need a simple 50-vote majority plus the vice president to break a tie.
You got it. But the catch, and this is a big catch, is that reconciliation can only be used for legislation that directly alters federal spending or revenues.
So no standard policy laws. It strictly has to be about the budget.
Right. And the Republican Party is actually deeply divided on how to use this tool.
I see.
Well, the Senate leadership is pushing for what they call a skinny bill approach. They want to pass smaller, targeted bills handling defense and border spending first.
And then deal with extending the 2017 tax cuts later.
Exactly. They want to kick that complicated tax issue down the road, but the House is demanding the exact opposite.
Of course they are.
Yeah, the House wants a one-bill strategy. They want to cram the entire agenda into a single massive piece of legislation.
And the targets in that House plan are huge, right?
Massive. They want to extend the 2017 tax cuts while simultaneously slashing $880 billion from Medicaid.
Wait, $880 billion.
Yep. And if you are wondering why that specific number matters to you as a listener, it targets the population that gained health care coverage under the Affordable Care Act expansion.
Okay, break that down for me. How does that mechanism actually work?
Under the ACA, the federal government pays a significantly higher matching rate to states that expanded Medicaid to cover lower-income adults.
Okay, so the House plan rolls back that extra federal funding.
Exactly. And if that happens, states would suddenly face a massive budget shortfall. They'd essentially be forced to either drastically raise state taxes or kick millions of people off their healthcare rolls.
Okay, so just looking at this, practically trying to push a massive agenda like that with a 2-vote margin, that feels less like parallel parking a bus and more like trying to build a house of cards on a wobbly table in an earthquake.
That is a perfect way to put it.
I mean, if even one moderate Republican sneezes at the math, the entire thing collapses. With a margin of just 2 or 3 votes, how do they pass an $880 billion cut without a single defection?
Well, the short answer is they likely can't, which is why internal GOP disagreements are already spilling out into public view.
Over the tax cuts.
Yeah, the fights are getting intensely technical. For instance, Senate leaders want to use a specific economic scoring method that assumes the 2017 tax cuts were going to be permanent anyway.
Oh, I see. So by using that baseline, extending the cuts technically costs $0 on paper.
Exactly.
That sounds like an accounting trick that fiscal conservatives in the House would instantly reject.
Oh, they are absolutely rejecting it. Conservative House members, notably Representative Chip Roy of Texas, are publicly calling that scoring strategy fairy dust.
Fairy dust. Wow.
Yeah, Roy has drawn a hard line. He stated he will vote against the legislation if leadership does not honestly account for the cost of those tax cuts.
And with a 2-vote margin, losing Chip Roy and maybe one other fiscal conservative completely derails the entire Republican platform.
Completely derails it, yeah.
It's fascinating because that level of fragility paralyzing the Republicans is actually mirroring a really deep ideological rot happening across the aisle of the Democrats.
It really is.
Because usually when a party loses power and hits rock bottom in the polls like the Democrats have, it acts as a unifying force. You circle the wagons, you fight the majority.
Right. That's the traditional playbook.
But right now, the Democratic Party is doing the exact opposite. Their base is an open rebellion.
It is, and it connects directly back to that historic 27% approval rating we talked about. Voters and even politicians are looking at the 2024 losses and realizing that the old way of doing things is obsolete.
The frustration is just boiling over. I mean, Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin provided the perfect example recently.
Oh, her speech was incredible.
She delivered a speech openly slamming her own party. She called Democrats weak and woke.
Right. She argued that the party needs to stop policing language and instead embrace what she called alpha energy.
Yeah, she actually pointed to the Detroit Lions football coach, Dan Campbell.
He did. She said he represents the exact type of unapologetic, aggressive persona the party needs to adopt if they want to win back working-class voters.
Which is sharp rhetoric, but you're seeing actual electoral consequences from this, right?
Oh, absolutely. This anti-establishment wave is tearing through primary elections across the country. Progressive leaders and grassroots voters are actively rebelling against candidates who were handpicked by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
So wait, is this just normal primary season infighting? Or is the establishment actually losing its grip on the voters?
They are losing their grip. Trust in the traditional party playbook has simply evaporated.
We're seeing that play out aggressively in Maine, for instance.
Right. So in Maine, Chuck Schumer and the national establishment threw their weight behind the current governor, Janet Mills, who is a staunch moderate.
But a progressive insurgent named Graham Plattner jumped into the race.
Yes. And here's the crazy part-sitting Democratic senators, specifically Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, are actively endorsing and campaigning for Plattner against their own leader's chosen candidate.
Wow. And the exact same dynamic is unfolding in Minnesota, isn't it?
Yep. The establishment-backed Representative Angie Craig, while the progressive wing threw its support behind Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan.
Because when 38% of registered voters say they have a very negative view of the party, tying yourself to national leadership is suddenly a liability.
It's a huge liability. It's a complete rejection of national leadership.
And nowhere is this team in rebellion dynamic clearer than in the must-win battleground state of Michigan.
Michigan is the absolute microcosm of this internal crisis.
Right, because Senator Gary Peters is retiring, which opens up a crucial Senate seat.
And it has led to a three-way Democratic primary that perfectly illustrates the fracture. You have three candidates representing entirely different visions for the party's future.
Let's walk through them. First is Representative Haley Stevens.
Right. So Stevens represents the traditional establishment lane. She gets heavy backing from prominent pro-Israel lobbying groups like AIPAC, and she is really doubling down on those traditional geopolitical alliances.
Okay, then you have Abdul El-Said.
He is a physician running in the staunch progressive lane. He champions domestic policies like Medicare for All, but his real traction comes from his role in the uncommitted movement.
This is regarding the war in Gaza.
Exactly. He heavily protested the administration's foreign policy there, and he frequently refers to the military actions as a genocide.
And then sitting right between them is State Senator Mallory McMorrow.
Yeah, she is attempting a really difficult tightrope walk as the bridge candidate. She aligns with El-Said on halting offensive weapons shipments to Israel.
But she's doing something very unusual regarding campaign finance, right?
She is. She's taking the highly unusual step of publicly demanding that AIPAC and other massive political action committees just stay out of the primary entirely.
She's betting that voters are exhausted by big money influence.
Exactly.
Well, the polling reflects a completely fractured electorate. A recent Emerson poll shows El-Sayed and McMorrow deadlocked in the lead at 24% each.
While Stevens, despite having all that establishment backing, is trailing them at 13%.
But to truly understand why the establishment strategy is failing here, we have to examine the data coming out of the city of Dearborn during the 2024 general election.
The Dearborn numbers are absolutely staggering. They force strategists to rethink basic assumptions about voter behavior.
Because Dearborn has a massive Arab American and Muslim population, a demographic that historically voted heavily Democratic.
Right. But here is the raw data from 2024. Donald Trump won the city with 42.48% of the vote.
And Kamala Harris pulled in just 36.26%.
But the real shocker is Jill Stein. The Green Party candidate surged to capture 18.37% of the vote.
Grabbing nearly a fifth of the electorate as a third-party candidate in a major city, that is practically unheard of in modern presidential races.
It is. But what stands out in the data is how deliberate the voters were. They didn't just experience some mass ideological shift to the Republican Party.
No, looking at the ballots, it was incredibly coordinated.
They engaged in highly surgical split-ticket voting.
Right. They intentionally punished the national Democratic ticket over foreign policy. Specifically, the administration's handling of Gaza by voting for Trump or Stein for president.
But they did not vote straight-ticket Republican down the ballot.
They kept their local Democrats in power, like Democratic Representative Rashida Tlaib. She won her district comfortably with over 62% of the vote.
They punished nationally, but trusted locally. And that specific ticket splitting presents a monumental threat to Democrats in the upcoming 2026 midterms.
Because this primary fight between Stevens, El-Sayed, and McMorrow is going to be bruised and expensive.
And waiting at the finish line is Mike Rogers. He's the presumptive Republican nominee, and he is sitting on a massive $45 million war chest funded by outside conservative groups.
So he is perfectly positioned to sweep in while the Democrats deplete their resources fighting each other.
Exactly.
Which brings up a critical math problem for the general election. If a traditional establishment candidate like Haley Stevens manages to pull out a win in this primary, she's going to face a deeply alienated progressive base.
Oh, absolutely.
So what stops those 18% of Dearborn voters who backed Jill Stein from simply staying home in November?
Honestly, nothing stops them. And that is the exact nightmare scenario keeping Democratic strategists awake right now.
It's not just a protest vote, it's a lack of votes entirely.
Right. The real threat is a total collapse in voter turnout. And the 2024 data proves this is already happening.
What were the turnout numbers?
Well, while the state of Michigan enjoyed a robust statewide voter turnout of 74.6%, turnout in Dearborn plummeted to just 54.7%.
Wow. They just left tens of thousands of votes on the table.
A nearly 20-point drop in turnout compared to the state average is devastating in a state decided by razor-thin margins.
Because when a voting bloc feels completely ignored or alienated by the top of the ticket, staying home is often their strongest form of protest.
Exactly. If the eventual Democratic nominee cannot find a way to re-energize that frustrated base without simultaneously alienating the moderate swing voters they need in the suburbs, the math simply does not work.
And a loss in Michigan likely seals a Republican majority in the Senate.
Yes.
It constantly loops back to the unforgiving reality of these margins. Whether you're tracking House Republicans fighting over the accounting math of $880 billion in Medicaid cuts, or Senate Democrats tearing each other apart over foreign policy, the cushion for error is zero.
Zero. In a political landscape defined by two-vote majorities, every single internal party fracture carries massive national consequences.
The era of broad unifying party mandates seems entirely over.
It really does. Right now, political power is entirely dependent on keeping highly fractured single-issue coalitions from falling apart at the seams.
Which leaves us with a critical new dynamic to consider, something we're just reporting on based on where the data is pointing. In decades past, foreign policy was rarely the deciding factor in local or state-level elections, right?
Right. Voters cared about property taxes, local schools, health care.
But looking at the surgical voting in Dearborn over the conflict in Gaza, it raises a major question for you to ponder. If local and state elections are now serving as referendums on global conflicts, we might soon see foreign state-sponsored PAYCOs pouring dark money directly into local mayoral races and state Senate primaries.
Trying to shape American foreign policy from the ground up.
Exactly. It entirely changes the definition of a local election. It turns neighborhood primaries into global battlegrounds.
It's a fascinating and maybe slightly terrifying shift to watch.
Keep an eye on those margins, question the data, and keep exploring the news with a critical eye. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.